I want to introduce the first speaker to you, which is Beatrice Galilee. She only just arrived here in Rotterdam. She is London-based, so she started this morning in London. No, sorry, she's London-born and New York-based. Do I say it right, Beatrice? Yeah. She's a curator, a writer, and an advisor, and internationally recognized for her expertise in global contemporary architecture and design. Between 2014 and 2019, she was the curator of the architecture and design in the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. She was the author of this great book. That's why I know her, which is Radical Architecture for the Future. She's also, that's also important, she's co-founder and executive director of The World Around, which is an organization dedicated to amplifying impactful global design and architecture. So, we have your presentation ready. You are here. We're very happy to have you here. Please come to the stage. Can I have a big hand for Beatrice Galilee? This one's yours. The big one. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it does.
Yes. Okay. Leon, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Emma, and all the organizers of this event. Thank you for staying in this slightly dubious weather conditions. But I am British, so yeah, this is a kind of warm summer day for us. I'm gonna, I'm, as Leon said, I'm a curator and writer. My background as an independent curator started in 2009, and I have worked in many different contexts and trying to, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the concept of architecture curator, but it's a little bit of a complicated concept. I mean, it's all about trying to invent architecture from scratch in a way, and a lot of it is commissioning and discussing and being creative and playful with opportunities. So having a look back at my past projects, I was thinking about relationships to the city and how architecture is in these types of dialogues and these types of opportunities to display architecture. These kind of conferences and talks I kind of include as my curatorial practice. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my work at the Met and also my project, which is called The World Around, which I would love you all to visit. We have a website where we have an archive of conversations and talks looking at contemporary architecture. And again, the reason that we have a website and the reason that we organize conferences is it's very difficult to present and curate architecture. So the idea of first-person presentations and first-person communication and storytelling is super important to us. So I guess I'm going to start with an idea about rooftops from a curatorial perspective, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about rooftops and my experience with them as a researcher and writer. I wanted to start with some images from Mishka Henner, who's an artist who I think kind of gives a different perspective of why we're looking at rooftops and the opportunity of looking down, I guess, from things. I don't know if anyone is familiar with these images. Do you know what they are? Can you even guess? They're GPS images, but do you know what they're of? So these are taken from Google Earth, and they are feedlots in Texas. So all of these images are taken from satellites, and each of these tiny brown squares represents a piece of land, and the tiny black dots represent animals. And these are feedlots. This is where cattle is raised and beef produced for McDonald's in the US. And so these images are very lightly edited, but it's obviously an artwork. And for me, it's also in my book, because even though this is a photographic project and an art project, I think it provides us with kind of a valuable lesson in like how important it is to look at things and how important it is to understand how interconnected we are to the food system, how interconnected we are to the landscapes around us, and all of our obligations in a way that we're not necessarily living up to. So when I was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we have a rooftop there, which I don't know if you know about that one, Leon, but it's one of the most important rooftop projects in New York. It is an opportunity for artists to respond to the city and respond to the Met. And this is a project by the late Dan Graham, as an artist who many of you may be aware of, who tried to respond to the idea of the Met Rooftop with a sort of hybrid project that was a combination of it's a glass pavilion, but it absorbs the idea of the office tower, but it also is an opportunity for people to see themselves in the city reflected in the pavilion. And so when you approach, so he basically landscaped the whole rooftop in grass, and then created these very, very special curving glass that have this super delicate and very, very controlled reflections. So when you approach the glass, you also see yourself looking at the glass because it's double. It has this sort of triple double glazing in different places, and there is also a kind of hedge on the interior of the project. And so the Dan Graham's pavilion and his contribution to the rooftop was also a way of sort of reflecting back the city to all of us and the people that are experiencing it, as well as being quite critical, I think, of the role of the city in New York and how much it manifests the wealth and the privilege and the distance that we have between each other and the city. My first project was this. This is a project by the British artist Cornelia Parker. And when she came to the roof and she found out that she was working with not an art curator, but an architecture curator, she was kind of interested in what we could do together to create a story about Manhattan and also about New York and her relationship to the city and the sort of visual relationship between art, cinema, art history, and New York. And she wanted to basically build. This is a replica of the house from Psycho, if that is making sense to anyone. And she wanted to make the house out of a red barn. So she wanted to fuse these two hybrid conditions. One, which was the architecture as the simple homely life in the countryside of the red barn, which appears in all many Hopper paintings and is kind of often used in civic events for weddings and so on. But also the haunted house and the idea of the house as a place for all of your. In the case of Psycho, it sort of represents where your darkest fears are, where your mother is in the basement, where all of these nightmares happen, and the trope of the haunted house really comes out of the Psycho house and its relationship with this sort of French kind of whatever, however you would call that, rooftop roof line. And we basically tore down a barn and rebuilt every single element of it, but it's a facade. So in a way, you can see this photo shows that the whole house itself is a facade, like as it was on the United lot in LA where Psycho was filmed, and also where many other films are filmed. So the Psycho house itself, even though it was on a lot, remained and continued to be appeared in other houses as haunted houses or in the distance or as a house on the hill. And so the art project was a relationship with both Psycho and the city. Oh no, I'm going backwards, sorry. Like here, you can see the house as something that's perhaps 3D, and then the minute that you kind of walk around it and backwards, you see that the house is also an image, that it's also a sign, that the house and the facade of buildings also have this idea of communicating and what that does to our relationship with architecture as a museum goer. And so this was my first big project at the Met, and then the second Rooftop project was with Adrián Villarojas, who's an Argentine artist who, completely opposite to Cornelia Parker, was like, well, if we're going to do something on the roof of the Met, if we're going to make a sculpture on the roof of the Met, doesn't that make the Met a plinth? And doesn't that make the whole history of art the kind of part of the sort of like subterranean component of this installation? And so he basically wanted to reproduce and sort of regurgitate the basement of the Met, or the kind of histories of the Met, into the sculptures, and bring them up through the rooftop installation. So we scanned something like 100 objects from the Met's collection, 3D scanned them, and then milled them and created multiple sculptures. And the idea behind many of these sculptures was that these are the kind of colonial relics that have been dislocated from their pasts and from their contexts, and then by kind of fusing them together and creating these narratives, the art itself was having a different relationship with the city. And you can see that also there are people, this is actually me, on the bottom, those are my legs. Like he 3D scanned people and also integrated them into the sculptures. So the idea of the project was a kind of also a critique a little bit of the way that the Met approaches like the distance between art and objects, and the way that we're not allowed to touch things inside the museum, and that actually all of these objects were once alive and were now not so much. So, like going from my sort of more art projects and art history, one of the other really interesting comments I wanted to make about the idea of rooftops is that many times change only kind of comes after catastrophe, and these are the learning moments that have happened, I think, in many architectural projects and many city projects. And I think that we're in a context and we're in a time where catastrophe is all around us, and the only real positive thing we can do is try to generate change from that, and try to use architecture and design as a force and a transformational tool. This is a city in Bolivia called El Alto, and this is the work of the Bolivian architect Freddy Mamani. And Freddy Mamani's work is not necessarily about rooftops, but it definitely is about catastrophic change and the need and the urgency to use architecture as a tool for visibility, and the need and the urgency to use architecture as a place of transformational change. And in this case, it was about the invisibility of indigenous communities of the Aymara people in Bolivia, who have been essentially eliminated from their own country over the course of 250 years of colonialism. And his effort in trying to make that history visible through architecture and through these extraordinary brightly colored buildings, but also that they are in their own way economic drivers for people who are part of the Amerindian community. And I think another really important catastrophic change is going to be coming through landscape design. In Africa, across the Sahara Desert, there is an initiative called the Great Green Wall of Africa, which is attempting to link all the countries that go from west to east beneath the Sahara Desert that are affected by desertification, and that the cities are drying out, that one of the reasons that we have so much African immigration and migration is due to the desperate situation in the north of Africa. And so there are many initiatives that are trying to connect all of these cities, and many times through landscape design, and many times through the kind of economic drivers of change, not just like Freddy Mamani's projects, but in a way civic projects that transform spaces. And so going back to the sort of specifics of rooftops, the catastrophic change as a driver comes to mind in the case of China after an earthquake, after the Sichuan earthquake in 2008. Many architects went into the region, which was, if you remember, there was a number of schools were demolished and destroyed, and many young people died. And I was there the year after that happened, and there was just like a field of blue kind of UN tents, and the kind of desperate sadness that was happening in that situation was really kind of, you just felt like nothing good could ever happen there again. And so I've been following a lot of the projects and the regeneration of those towns in Jintai. And Rural Urban Framework have been developing a system of houses that have incorporated the rooftops as sort of farming initiatives and tiny rural farms that these communities can nurture themselves as a kind of tool for also restorative justice, like just that sense many of them had lost entire families had been lost during the earthquake, and so the idea of like having people be able to use their building, use the architecture as a way of restoring and finding peace again was really beautiful. And you can see here just like the really simple idea and gesture of creating that rooftop farm. I also love this project that I encountered recently by Andra Martin in Indonesia, which is I've never seen a green roof airport before, and I was really captivated by it and was so intrigued to learn more about his work in Indonesia. And a lot of the work that we're trying to do at the World Around is also trying to expose some of the connections and connectivity that we can learn from all over the world, essentially, like the type of ideas that are coming out of desperate need, and this sort of sense of catastrophe can also be applied. And I think that's very much the spirit of what Leon and Emma are doing here in terms of sharing. It's like there are so many interesting and inspiring projects that are happening all over the world. And I also love this project by Land Process. And more we're starting to get interested in landscape architecture at the World Around, because it seems to me like one of the very few opportunities to really add and be additive. I think growing things, creating sponge cities, using the idea of master planning and landscaping at scale as places that we can carbon capture, that we can use the cities as sponges, that we can use the cities as places of play, that we can use the cities as places of community. And this entire project, which is in Thailand, is also a way of kind of integrating landscape into a school life and school and landscapes there. And then another project that I wanted to share was also this one that has, I think, a really similar resonance in terms of its approach to growing. And you have a kind of, this is an urban farm in Thailand, and this is an urban farm in Palestine. This is in Ramallah and was built in 2017 by Hennigan Peng. And I wanted to just draw attention to this project as well, because I think, you know, more and more museums, and the role of museums is not just in terms of presenting, simple objects or like containing ideas, but the entire project of the museum here was part of the city and was also part of a restorative gesture where they're planting olive trees that had been removed from this region, and the architects and the landscape designers were adamant that they had to be part of it. And the entire museum landscape was all about growing native foods and growing and kind of creating space for indigenous plants and plant life. And again, I think that's similar attitudes with Churnscape in China. We just see, again, so many sort of, so much unity and so much sort of shared spirit, I think, all over the world in terms of trying to come up with solutions to the climate crisis using, by growing urban farms, by using our rooftops, by using our cities, and by creating spaces of change. And again, this is a project called Feral Atlas, which is about trying to draw attention to some of those connections and those connective tissues. And then I just wanted to end with a little also restorative project that my organization is doing called the Young Climate Prize, which is our own sort of catastrophic change initiative, which supports young people. It's called Young Climate Prize for 25 people under the age of 25, and we provide mentorship to young people through the architecture industries. And over the last 2 years, we've been working with young people who have their own climate-focused projects. We connect them with architectural figures, architectural leaders, artists who provide them with guidance and try to accelerate the impact of their projects. Many of them are working on the cutting edge of innovation in their own way, in their own very earnest and important way. And our organization is trying to support them and amplify their work. As I said, this is a project that tries to invest in young people and give space for something positive to come out of what sometimes can seem a little bit of a dark time. But I hope that wasn't too. I hope that was more optimistic than it intended to be. But thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thanks.